Let's take a look at the numbers now. Let's compare the 2012, what's on ground for the 2012 budget versus the 2013 projections. Projected revenue this time for 2013 is meant to go up 9.2% to 3.8 trillion. So obviously, federal government is expecting more, perhaps in terms from internally generated revenue, customs, taxation, and some other areas. Is this realizable?
No, I think if you look at that increment in revenue, it's mostly come from oil. If you look at oil production,
not even non-oil.
No. Okay. If you look at oil production estimate for 2012 was 2.448 million barrels per day. In 2013 fiscal framework, there is a budget of 2.53 million barrels per day. The oil price estimate in 2012 was $72. That of 2013 is $75. And I think that's where that is coming from. Right now, the fiscal framework has not been broken down to see if there's going to be an increment in internally generated revenue. But let me also tell you, the economy is slowing down. This sector activities is slowing down. So you may not necessarily see increase in corporate taxation. Of course, you may see increase in income from oil and gas. But I think the private sector is slowing down, and I want to believe that it's going to rub off negatively on the revenue coming from non-oil sectors.
When you say that the private sector is slowing down, are you referring to what monetary policy is, the fact that there is is it money supply? What exactly are you referring to? Yeah,
well, of course, when I say the private sector is slowing down, you have to look at, well, we did mention the GDP growth rate. If you look at the GDP growth rate in the first quarter, the lease sector, the manufacturing sector grew at about 3.54%. 2 years back, the manufacturing sector was still growing as high as 8%. So that's the sector that employs more people than any other sector in the country. Then if you look at the sector that are growing, those sectors are basically a sector that employ very few people. The telecom sector.
Retail, services, and
retail trade, import and export, particularly importation, So you are finding that, look, the economy itself, the sector that should drive an economic expansion are slowing down. Principally because, one, they have to contend with several factors. And one of those factors we have emphasized repeatedly is the issue of cost of funds. Of course, we know beyond the cost of funds, the CBN governor said that even if you drop the cost of funds, that the real sector will still struggle. Mm-hmm. That's true. But the cost of funds adds to the challenges the real sector have to contend with. They have to contend with the issue of energy costs, availability, and cost, because a lot of them have to rely on diesel to run their operations. They have to contend with the cost of logistics, moving goods from one location of the country to the other. They have to use road transport, and they have to lose days on road transport along the road. They have to contend now with the high cost of funds. Today, last week, Interbank taught 35%. But let's even forget about Interbank and focus on what's the real sector bonus at. Okay. Average cost of lending to the government is about 16%. Risk-free rate is about 16%. So it makes sense for banks to add a risk premium. And if you add a risk premium of something like 2-3%, you're talking about something close to 20%. If you borrow at 20%, your gross margin must not be less than 50% for you to break even. Because your operating cost, the rate operating cost, will still be at least 90%. So if you have a gross margin of less than 50%, you cannot break even. And which sector of productive activities has gross margin of 50%? So that's why people are shutting down their real sector activities to use their money to play in the money market. And the economy, we cannot grow the economy that way. And that's why you are seeing increase in unemployment level. And the challenge is we need to come up with a fiscal framework and a monetary framework that will align with each other and ensure, one, we grow the economy so that we can create employment, and those factors will actually moderate the risk that central bank has been fighting, the risk of inflation.
But Johnson, you just said a budget fiscal framework that would spur employment, create jobs and all of that. But that is what the federal government, when the federal government says we brought out our 2013 medium-term fiscal framework for the 2013 budget, that is what the budget is meant to do.
The challenge is that there's no harmonization between the fiscal framework and the monetary policy.
Well, apart from the monetary policy, starting from the fiscal authorities themselves, looking at the budget that they put down, what they want to spend for recurrent spending, capital, exchange rate, the key items in the budget, you don't look at it and say, okay, this is something that might have some kind of impact.
No, you see, no doubt. the increase from 28.5% to 31.34% in capital expenditure will have a beneficial effect on the economy. But I said it's incremental. It's not transformational. And that's what I'm talking about.
So what we shouldn't use the word transformation.
Yes.
The federal government shouldn't use the word.
Budget,
so we're not transforming
the budget
anything
we are seeing is an incremental budget. We're moving, it's a marginal improvement. Okay? And the rate of growth we need to create employment for the teeming number of unemployed people is going to be something like 15% in GDP growth rate. And an increment in capital expenditure from 1.4 trillion to 1.55 trillion, which is what it translates to, will not have that drastic impact. And there are basic things we need to do, we can do, within the limited resources we have, to have that transformational impact, to have the resources to grow the economy at a faster rate than we are growing today. One of which I did mention personally is that we need to address our level of consumption. Beyond the government's consumption level, we have to address the level at which private sector consumes public resources.